Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed down from the mining platform. 3 years on Kepler 442b, and he still wasn't used to the humid air that clung to everything like a wet blanket. The red dwarf sun hung low in the purple sky, casting strange shadows across the crystalline formations that jutted from the planet's surface like frozen lightning. Another day, another broken drill, Marcus muttered, hefting his toolkit. The titanium extraction operation never stopped, but the equipment sure did. That's why they needed him, one of the few humans crazy enough to take a job on the edge of known space, fixing machines that alien corporations were too cheap to replace. The distress signal came through his comm unit as he was walking back to base camp. A series of rapid clicks and low-frequency rumbles that his universal translator couldn't quite decode. Marcus frowned, checking the signal's origin. It was coming from the Forbidden Valley, the deep canyon system where even the bravest miners refused to go. Local stories said things lived down there. Big things. Dangerous things. Marcus had always figured the stories were just that, stories. But as he stood at the edge of the valley, watching the sunset and listening to that desperate signal repeat over and over, something in his gut told him this was real. Probably just some lost survey drone, he told himself, but his hands were already pulling out his climbing gear. The descent into the valley took 2 hours. His headlamp cut through the growing darkness, illuminating walls of black rock that seemed to absorb light. Strange plants grew in the crevices, glowing with soft bioluminescence that painted everything in shades of blue and green. The signal grew stronger as he went deeper. Soon he could hear it without his comm unit, a rhythmic thumping that echoed off the canyon walls like a massive heartbeat. When Marcus finally reached the source, his breath caught in his throat. A dragon. Not the medieval fantasy kind from old Earth stories, but something far more magnificent. The creature was easily 30 feet long, with scales that shifted color like oil on water. Its wings were pinned beneath a massive boulder that had fallen from the canyon wall, and one of its legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. The dragon's head turned toward Marcus as he approached, and he found himself staring into eyes that held an intelligence that made his skin crawl. This wasn't some dumb animal. This was a thinking, feeling being, and it was in agony. "Oh hell," Marcus whispered. The dragon made a sound. Not quite a roar, not quite a whimper. It was trying to speak, Marcus realized. The universal translator in his helmet crackled to life. "Help!" The voice was deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Please." Marcus had trained for a lot of things during his years as a technician. Equipment failure, atmospheric breaches, even hostile wildlife encounters. But he'd never trained for this. He approached slowly, hands raised. "Easy there, big guy. I'm going to help you, okay? Just don't try to barbecue me." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly. "You understand me?" "Yeah, I understand you." Marcus was already examining the boulder that had the creature trapped. It was huge, easily 5 tons of solid rock. No way he could move it by conventional means, but Marcus hadn't survived 3 years on this rock by giving up easily. "What's your name?" Marcus asked as he unpacked his gear. "I am Draconius of the Ember Clan," the dragon replied, its voice growing weaker. "I was hunting the crystal worms when the stonefall trapped me." That was many cycles ago. Marcus did some quick math. If Draconius had been trapped here for several days without food or water, he was probably dying. The thought made Marcus work faster. "Well, Draconius, I'm Marcus. I fix things for a living, and right now, you're the biggest thing I've ever had to fix." He pulled out his plasma cutter and industrial jack system, tools designed for breaking down mining equipment, but they'd have to do. The plasma cutter could slice through rock, but it would take time. Time the dragon might not have. "Why do you help me, human Marcus?" Draconius asked as Marcus began cutting into the boulder. "Your kind and mine. We do not know each other." Marcus paused in his work. It was a good question. Why was he risking his life for a creature he'd never seen before? "Because you asked for help," he said finally. "And because leaving someone to die when you can save them, that's not right. Not where I come from." The dragon was quiet for a long moment. "Your species is different than we were told, yeah? What were you told?" "That humans are destroyers, that they take what they want and leave nothing behind." Marcus thought about the mining operation above, the way the corporations strip-mined worlds without caring about the environmental impact. "Some of us are like that," he admitted, "but not all of us." The cutting work was slow and dangerous. The boulder was unstable, and Marcus had to be careful not to bring more rocks down on both of them. His hands cramped from gripping the plasma cutter, and sweat stung his eyes despite the cool canyon air. "Tell me about your clan," Marcus said, partly to keep the dragon conscious and partly to distract himself from the enormity of what he was attempting. Draconius spoke of his people, a proud race that had lived on this world for thousands of years, before the mining ships arrived. They were not primitive savages, as the corporations claimed, but a sophisticated civilization with their own technology, art, and culture. They stayed hidden in the deep places of the world, avoiding contact with the humans who had invaded their home. "We watch your people," Draconius said. "We see how they wound the earth, how they poisoned the waters. We thought all humans were the same." Marcus felt a stab of guilt. He was part of the mining operation after all. But he pushed the feeling aside and focused on his work. After 4 hours of cutting, the boulder finally split. Marcus used his jack system to lever the pieces apart, creating just enough space for the dragon to pull its wing free. Draconius tested the wing carefully, wincing, but managing to fold it properly against his back. The leg was still injured, but the dragon could move. "You have freed me," Draconius said, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder. "I am in your debt, human Marcus." Marcus packed up his gear, exhausted but satisfied. "No debt needed, just maybe put in a good word for humans with your clan, okay?" But as they prepared to part ways, neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone that had been watching from the shadows, recording everything. Marcus returned to base camp as the twin moons rose over Kepler 442b, their pale light casting everything in silver. His muscles ached from the climb out of Forbidden Valley, and his mind kept replaying the encounter with Draconius. Had it really happened? The whole thing felt like a dream, too strange to be real. But the plasma burns on his cutter were real enough, and his gear still smelled like the strange minerals from the canyon depths. The base camp was quiet except for the hum of the atmospheric processors and the distant rumble of the night shift mining operations. Most of the crew was asleep, and Marcus was grateful for the silence. He wasn't ready to explain where he'd been or what he'd seen. He was cleaning his equipment when his comm unit chirped. "Incoming message from Director Vance, the head of mining operations." Marcus frowned. Vance never contacted the technical staff directly, especially not in the middle of the night. "Chen, report to my office immediately." The director's office was in the main habitat module, a sterile environment of white walls and corporate logos. Vance sat behind his desk, his pale face illuminated by multiple holographic displays showing mining data and profit projections. "Sit down, Marcus," Vance said without looking up from his screens. Marcus sat, trying to keep his expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Director?" Vance finally turned to face him, his cold blue eyes studying Marcus intently. "Where were you tonight between 1800 and 200 hours? Marcus's heart rate spiked, but he kept his voice steady. "Equipment maintenance in Sector 7. Drill assembly replacement." "Interesting." Vance touched his display, and a holographic video began playing above his desk. Marcus watched in horror as footage of his rescue of Draconius played out in perfect detail. The surveillance drone had captured everything. The dragon, the conversation, the rescue itself. "Care to revise your statement?" Vance asked. Marcus's mind raced. How much trouble was he in? Unauthorized exploration was against company policy, but was helping an injured creature actually a crime? "I heard a distress signal," Marcus said finally. "I went to investigate, and found one of the local hostels," Vance finished. "Interesting that you chose to help it rather than report its location to security." "It was injured. It needed help." Vance leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Chen?" "What this footage represents?" Marcus shook his head. "This is the first recorded evidence of intelligent communication with the native life forms. The Xenobiology Department has been trying to make contact for 3 years with no success. The dragons, as you call them, have avoided all contact with our people. So you're not going to fire me?" Vance laughed, a cold sound. "Fire you? Chen, you've just become the most valuable employee on this planet. The board is very interested in establishing formal contact with the natives. There may be significant advantages to a partnership." Marcus didn't like the way Vance said advantages. "What kind of advantages?" The natives clearly have extensive knowledge of this world's mineral deposits. They've lived here for thousands of years. Imagine what they could tell us about untapped resources, unexplored regions. You want to use them. I want to work with them, Vance corrected. Mutual benefit. We provide technology, medicine, protection. They provide information and cooperation. Marcus thought about Draconius's words, about how dragons saw humans as destroyers. I don't think they're interested in cooperation. That's where you come in. Vance stood and walked to the window overlooking the mining complex. You've already established a relationship with one of them. I want you to make contact again. Arrange a meeting with their leadership. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a technician. You're whatever I need you to be, Chen. Your contract gives the company broad discretionary authority over your duties. Vance turned back to him. This is not a request. Marcus felt trapped. He thought about Draconius, injured and vulnerable, trusting a human for the first time. Had Marcus just betrayed that trust by leading the corporation to them? What if they refuse? Marcus asked. Then we'll have to pursue other options. Vance's tone was neutral, but Marcus heard the threat underneath. The board is very interested in this world's resources, Chen. One way or another, we're going to extract maximum value from our investment here. Marcus left the meeting with a sick feeling in his stomach. He had 48 hours to make contact with Draconius again and arrange a meeting with Dragon leadership. If he failed, Vance had implied that the company might use more aggressive methods. Back in his quarters, Marcus stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do. He could warn Draconius to stay away, but that would only delay the inevitable. The company had resources, patience, and no morals when it came to profit margins. Or he could try to control the situation. Be present for the meeting. Try to ensure the dragons got a fair deal. Maybe he could even negotiate something that would benefit both species. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something terrible in motion. The next day passed in a blur of routine maintenance work. Marcus went through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Draconius, about the dragon's injured wing and the trust in those ancient eyes. As evening approached, Marcus made his decision. He would return to Forbidden Valley, find Draconius, and tell him the truth. Whatever happened after that would be up to the dragons. He packed his gear, including a small emergency beacon that would allow him to signal base camp if needed. If he was going to broker a meeting between two species, he wanted some way to call for help if things went wrong. The descent into the valley was easier the second time. Marcus knew the route now, and he moved with purpose through the glowing darkness of the canyon depths. But when he reached the spot where he'd found Draconius, the dragon was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold: scorch marks on the canyon walls, the distinctive pattern left by military-grade plasma weapons, and in the center of the scorched area, a puddle of something dark that looked suspiciously like blood. Marcus activated his comm unit and tried to contact Draconius, broadcasting on the same frequency the dragon had used. There was no response. But as he stood in the darkness, surrounded by evidence of violence, Marcus heard something that chilled him to the bone. The sound of wings beating in the distance, growing closer. Not one set of wings, many, and they didn't sound friendly. Marcus reached for his emergency beacon, but before he could activate it, the canyon filled with the roar of approaching dragons. Their bioluminescent scales lit up the darkness like living stars, and their eyes burned with fury. Draconius descended from the canyon rim, his wing still favoring the injury but functional. Behind him came others, dragons of different sizes and colors, all radiating anger and betrayal. "Hello again, human Marcus," Draconius said, his voice cold as space. "We need to talk." Marcus stood frozen as 12 massive dragons landed around him, their scales rippling with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like angry heartbeats. Each one was unique, some sleek and serpentine, others broad and powerful, their wings casting shifting shadows in the canyon's eerie light. Draconius landed directly in front of him, and Marcus could see that the dragon's injuries had been treated with some kind of crystalline salve that glowed softly along his wing and leg. "Your people came looking for me," Draconius said, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "They brought weapons. They brought recording devices. They asked many questions about my clan, our numbers, our homes. Marcus's heart sank. Draconius, I can explain. Explain. A new voice cut through the air like a blade. One of the larger dragons stepped forward, her scales a deep crimson that seemed to absorb light. Explain how you used our brother's gratitude to spy on us? Elder Paraxis, Draconius said quietly. This is the human who saved me. The human who saved you and then led hunters to your location, Paraxis replied, her golden eyes fixed on Marcus. Did you think we would not notice the watchers in the sky? The metal birds that circle our sacred places? Marcus realized she was talking about surveillance drones. The company had been increasing their monitoring since his first encounter with Draconius. I didn't lead them to you, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice steady. They watched me. They saw our meeting without my knowledge. Yet you returned, another dragon said. This one with scales like polished obsidian. You came back to complete your betrayal. No, Marcus said firmly. I came back to warn you. My supervisors want to arrange a meeting with your leadership. They say they want cooperation, but I think they just want to use you. Elder Paraxis tilted her massive head. And you disapprove of your leader's methods? I think what they're planning is wrong, Marcus said. Your people have lived here for thousands of years. This is your world, not ours. A ripple of movement went through the assembled dragons. Several of them exchanged glances, and Marcus heard the sound of rapid, low-frequency communication that his translator couldn't parse. You claim to stand against your own kind, Paraxis said finally. This is unexpected. Not all humans are the same, Marcus replied, echoing what he'd told Draconius during the rescue. Some of us believe in doing what's right. Pretty words, the obsidian dragon said with a sound that might have been a laugh. But words cost nothing. What would you do to prove this claim, human? Marcus thought about Vance's ultimatum, about the corporate machinery that was already grinding into motion. What do you want me to do? Nothing, Paraxis said. We want nothing from humans. We want you to leave our world and never return. I don't have that authority. I'm just a technician. Then you are useless to us, the obsidian dragon said, taking a step closer. Marcus could feel the heat radiating from its body. Wait, Draconius interjected. Torvin, he saved my life when he could have left me to die. That must count for something. It counts for this moment, Torvin replied. It is why you still breathe, human. But gratitude has limits. Paraxis raised a clawed hand for silence. Marcus Chen, she said, and hearing his full name from a dragon's mouth was startling. Yes, we know who you are. We have watched your kind since the first ships arrived. We know your names, your purposes, your weaknesses. Then you know I'm not important enough to make decisions about anything, Marcus said. Perhaps, but you may be important enough to carry a message. Marcus waited. Tell your leaders this, Paraxis continued. The Ember Clan has voted. We will not be driven from our ancestral homes. We will not be enslaved to serve your mining operations. And we will not allow our sacred places to be defiled for profit. And if they don't listen? Paraxis smiled, revealing teeth like white knives. Then they will learn why this valley is forbidden. The temperature in the canyon seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked around at the assembled dragons and realized that each one was a weapon capable of reducing the mining base to slag. How many of you are there? Marcus asked. More than your people suspect, Torvin said. Fewer than we would like. If there's a war, everyone loses, Marcus said. Your people mine, this whole world could be destroyed. Your people should have considered that before they came here uninvited, Paraxis replied. I agree, Marcus said, and the admission seemed to surprise the dragons. But I'm here now and I want to find a solution that doesn't end with bloodshed. Draconius looked at him intently. What do you propose? Marcus thought fast. He wasn't a negotiator, but he understood systems and how they could be fixed when they broke down. What if I could convince my people that attacking you would be too costly, that the mining operation would be more profitable if it worked with you instead of against you? You would lie to them? Paraxis asked. I would show them the truth, Marcus said, that you have technology, knowledge and resources that could benefit both our species. But only if the relationship is based on respect and equality. We have no desire to share our secrets with destroyers, Torvin said. Then don't share secrets, Marcus replied. Share wisdom, teaching. Your people have lived in harmony with this world for thousands of years. Mine are slowly poisoning it. Maybe we could learn from you. The dragons were quiet for a long moment, communicating in their subsonic language. Marcus waited, acutely aware that his life hung in the balance. Finally, Pyraxis spoke. You present an interesting proposition, Marcus Chen, but we have little reason to trust human promises. Then don't trust promises. Test actions. Marcus pulled out his personal comm unit and held it up. This contains all the surveillance data the company has collected on your people. Flight patterns, territory maps, population estimates. If I give this to you instead of my supervisors, you'll know where you stand. And what would you tell your leaders about this lost data? That the dragons destroyed it. That you're more dangerous than anyone realized. That might buy us time to work out a real solution. Draconia stepped closer to Elder Pyraxis and spoke to her in rapid dragon speech. She listened, then looked back at Marcus. My young cousin speaks well of your character, she said. But character is easy to fake and difficult to verify. We will consider your proposal, but we make no promises. What about the meeting my supervisors want? Tell them we will meet, Pyraxis said. But not on their terms. If they want to speak with the Ember clan, they will come to our sacred grounds. They will come unarmed, and they will come knowing that they are guests in our domain. Marcus nodded. I'll pass that along. See that you do. Pyraxis spread her massive wings, preparing to take flight. And Marcus Chen, yes? Do not make us regret sparing your life. One by one, the dragons took to the air, their bioluminescent scales leaving trails of light in the darkness. Draconius was the last to leave. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving me and for trying to save my people. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. I might have just made everything worse. As the sound of wings faded into the distance, Marcus was left alone in the canyon with his thoughts and a terrible sense that he'd just committed himself to something far beyond his abilities. He had 36 hours to convince Director Vance to attend a meeting on dragon terms, knowing that the man would never agree to give up the tactical advantage of home ground, unless Marcus could make him believe that the alternative was total annihilation of the mining operation. Time to find out just how good he was at creative problem-solving. Marcus spent the walk back to base camp, planning his deception. By the time he reached the perimeter lights, he had his story straight. It would require some acting, a few strategic lies, and a lot of luck. He deliberately roughed up his clothes and equipment, added some dirt to his face, and practiced looking shaken. When he finally entered the main habitat module, he was the picture of a man who'd barely escaped disaster. Chen, Director Vance's voice boomed across the common area. Where the hell have you been? You missed your check-in 6 hours ago. I made contact, Marcus said, allowing his voice to shake slightly. With the dragons, it didn't go well. Vance's expression shifted from anger to intense interest. Come to my office now. Within minutes, Marcus was sitting across from Vance again, this time with Chief of Security Morrison present. Morrison was a grizzled ex-military man whose cybernetic arm and scarred face spoke to a violent past. Tell us everything, Vance demanded. Marcus took a deep breath and began his carefully crafted story. I found Draconius again, like you asked. But I wasn't alone for long. More of them showed up. A lot more. How many? Morrison asked, leaning forward. 12 that I saw, but I heard others in the distance. They knew about our surveillance. They knew about the drones, the monitoring equipment, everything. Vance frowned. How could they know about our surveillance network? They're not primitive, Marcus said. They have technology. Different from ours, but advanced. They can detect our electronic signatures, track our movements. They've been watching us since we arrived. This was mostly true, which made the lie more convincing. What did they want? Morrison asked. They're angry about the mining operation. They consider this world sacred and they see us as invaders. The one called Elder Pyraxis made their position very clear, which was, leave or be destroyed. Marcus let that sink in for a moment. They demonstrated their weapons capabilities on some rock formations. Turned solid stone into molten glass in seconds. Whatever they're using, it's more powerful than our plasma cutters. Morrison's cybernetic hand clenched involuntarily. Directed energy weapons? Something like that. Maybe some kind of focused heat beam. All I know is that they could have vaporized me without effort. But they didn't, Vance observed. Why? Because Draconius convinced them to give us one chance. One opportunity to prove that humans can be reasoned with. What kind of opportunity? Marcus took another deep breath. They want a meeting, but it has to be on their terms. Absolutely not, Morrison said immediately. We don't negotiate with hostiles on enemy ground. It's not a negotiation, Marcus said. It's a demonstration. They want to show us what they're capable of. Make sure we understand the consequences if we continue the mining operation. Vance was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. What exactly are they proposing? A meeting at their sacred site. Yumi and maybe 2 security personnel. No weapons, no recording devices, no backup. They want to discuss terms for coexistence. It's a trap, Morrison said flatly. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But if we refuse, they'll consider it an act of war. And based on what I saw tonight, Director, we're not equipped to fight them. Our security forces, Morrison began, are designed to handle human threats, Marcus interrupted. These beings can fly, they have energy weapons, and they know this terrain better than we ever will. How do you fight an enemy that can attack from any direction and disappear into canyon systems we can't even map? Vance stood and walked to his window, looking out at the mining complex. Hundreds of millions of credits in equipment and infrastructure, all of it vulnerable to attack from above. What's your assessment, Chen? Professional opinion? Marcus chose his words carefully. I think they're telling the truth about their capabilities. I also think they're genuinely trying to avoid a conflict. If they wanted us dead, they could have started picking off our people months ago. Why haven't they? Because they're not monsters. They're a civilization with laws, ethics, leadership structure. They don't want to be murderers any more than we want to be victims. This was the crucial moment. Marcus had to sell Vance on the idea that the dragons were both powerful enough to destroy the mining operation and reasonable enough to negotiate with. The meeting location, Vance said finally. Where? A place they call the Crystal Heart. It's about 30 kilometers from here, deep in the canyon system. Natural amphitheater surrounded by crystal formations that have religious significance to their culture. How do we know it's not a kill zone? Marcus shrugged. We don't. But if they wanted us dead, there are easier ways to do it than luring us into an elaborate trap. Morrison shook his head. Sir, this is insane. We should contact corporate headquarters, request military support. Which would take 6 months to arrive, Vance pointed out, and would definitely be seen as an act of aggression. He turned back to Marcus. What's your gut feeling about these dragons? Can we trust them? Marcus thought about Draconius's injury, about the gratitude in his eyes when he was freed, about Elder Paraxis's measured words and Torvan's fierce protectiveness. I think they're honorable, Marcus said honestly. I think they keep their word. But I also think they'll do whatever they have to do to protect their people and their world. Vance nodded slowly. When do they want this meeting? Tomorrow night. They said the crystal formations are most active during the triple moon alignment. Convenient timing, Morrison muttered. Actually it is, Marcus said. The extra light will make it safer for us to navigate the canyons. And the crystal formations they mentioned might be some kind of natural power source for their technology. Vance was quiet for another long moment. Finally, he made his decision. We'll do it, but with modifications. You, me, Morrison, and 1 additional security officer. We bring emergency beacons in case we need extraction. And we have armed shuttles on standby at the base. Marcus wanted to object to the weapons and backup, but he couldn't push too hard without seeming suspicious. What if they detect the armed shuttles? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Vance sat back down at his desk. Chen, you're our liaison for this operation. I want you to contact them and confirm the meeting. Yes, sir. And Chen, if this goes wrong, if this is some kind of trap, you'll be the first to pay for it. Marcus nodded, understanding the threat. I believe they're sincere, Director. But I could be wrong. As he left the meeting, Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He'd successfully manipulated Vance into agreeing to the dragon's terms, but he'd also committed himself to a dangerous deception. If the meeting went badly, if violence broke out, it would be his fault. Back in his quarters, Marcus activated his comm unit and sent a coded message to the frequency Draconius had used. Simple words that he hoped would be understood. The meeting is confirmed. Tomorrow night. Crystal Heart location. 4 humans as discussed. The response came an hour later, Draconius's voice crackling through the static. Understood. Come in peace or do not come at all. Marcus spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd just arranged a diplomatic breakthrough or a massacre. In 18 hours he would find out which, either way, there would be no going back after tomorrow night. The relationship between humans and dragons would be forever changed, and Marcus would bear the responsibility for whatever that change brought. The journey to the Crystal Heart took 4 hours through terrain that tested even Marcus's climbing skills. Director Vance struggled with the rocky paths despite his expensive hiking gear, while Morrison and the additional security officer, Kowalski, moved with military precision through the canyon system. Marcus led the way, following coordinates Draconius had provided. His headlamp cut through the growing darkness as 3 moons rose overhead, their combined light turning the canyon walls into flowing rivers of silver. "How much further?" Vance asked, breathing heavily. "We're close," Marcus replied, checking his GPS unit. "Just around this bend." They rounded a massive stone outcropping and all 4 humans stopped dead in their tracks. The Crystal Heart was magnificent beyond anything Marcus had imagined. A natural amphitheater carved from living rock, its walls lined with towering crystal formations that pulsed with internal light. The crystals responded to the triple moon alignment, glowing brighter as the moons reached their zenith. And in the center of the amphitheater, 23 dragons waited. "Mother of God," Kowalski whispered. The dragons were arranged in a rough circle, their scales reflecting the crystal light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Elder Paraxis sat at the center, flanked by Draconius and Torvin. Other dragons that Marcus didn't recognize filled out the group, some massive and ancient, others younger and more agile. All of them were watching the humans with intelligent, calculating eyes. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "we're guests here. Show respect." They descended into the amphitheater, their footsteps echoing off the crystal walls. As they reached the center, Elder Paraxis rose to her full height, towering over them like a living mountain. "Director Vance," she said, her voice resonating through the crystals. "I am Elder Paraxis of the Ember Clan. You are welcome in this sacred place." Vance recovered from his shock remarkably quickly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Elder Pyraxis. I'm hoping we can reach an understanding." "Understanding," Paraxis repeated. "An interesting word. Do you understand why we have brought you here?" "To discuss the future of the mining operation," Vance said carefully. "No." Paraxis gestured with one massive claw, and the crystals around them began to glow brighter. "We brought you here to show you what you are destroying." The crystal light intensified, and suddenly the amphitheater was filled with images, holographic projections that showed the planet as it had been before the mining ships arrived. Vast forests of crystalline trees, rivers that sparkled with bioluminescent life, cities built into canyon walls where dragons lived in harmony with their environment. Then the images changed, showing the mining operation's impact. Poisoned water tables, strip-mined landscapes, the slow death of ecosystems that had thrived for millennia. "This is your handiwork," Torvin said, his voice filled with rage. "This is what human cooperation looks like." Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, before remembering he'd been ordered to come unarmed. "Sir," he whispered to Vance, "we need to leave now." But Vance was staring at the images with fascination rather than fear. "How are you generating these projections?" "The crystals," Elder Paraxis explained. "They are living memory. They record everything that happens on this world, preserve it for future generations to learn from." "Living memory," Vance repeated. "Are you saying these crystals are some kind of biological data storage system?" Marcus saw where this was going and felt his heart sink. Vance wasn't seeing a call for environmental responsibility. He was seeing a new technology to exploit. "Among other things," Draconius said carefully, "they are also the foundation of our civilization. Without the crystal networks, our cities would fall. Our knowledge would be lost." "Fascinating," Vance said. "What would it take to study these crystals? To understand their properties?" The temperature in the amphitheater seemed to drop 20 degrees. Every dragon present stiffened, and Marcus saw Torvin's claws extend slightly. "You wish to study our most sacred treasures?" Paraxis asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Marcus stepped forward quickly. "Director, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The dragons aren't offering to share their technology. They're showing us why we need to change our approach to mining." "Of course," Vance said smoothly. "I apologize if I gave the wrong impression. I'm simply curious about your remarkable achievements, but the damage was done." Marcus could see it in the dragon's body language, hear it in the subtle shift of their breathing patterns. Vance had just confirmed every suspicion they had about human intentions. "Perhaps," Elder Paraxis said slowly, "you could explain why your mining operation is necessary. What purpose does it serve?" Vance launched into a prepared speech about corporate responsibilities, shareholder value, and the economic benefits of resource extraction. As he spoke, Marcus watched the dragon's expressions grow increasingly cold. "So you poison our world to increase the wealth of beings who live among distant stars," Torvin said when Vance finished. "Beings who will never see this place or understand what they have destroyed." "It's not that simple," Vance began. "It is exactly that simple," another dragon interrupted. This one was smaller than the others but carried herself with unmistakable authority. "I am Keeper Zephyra of the memory crystals. For 300 years I have watched and recorded. I have seen what your kind does to worlds they consider valuable." The crystals around them began showing new images. Other planets, other mining operations, barren wastelands where forests once grew, polluted seas where life once thrived, the systematic destruction of world after world in service of corporate profits. "These are the memories shared by the crystal networks of 100 worlds," Zephyra continued. "The testimony of civilizations your corporations have displaced, poisoned, or driven to extinction." Morrison was reaching for his emergency beacon, but Marcus caught his arm. "Don't," Marcus whispered. "We're not in immediate danger." "How can you know that?" Morrison hissed back. "Because we're still breathing," Marcus replied. Elder Paraxis had been watching this exchange with interest. "Your companion understands something you do not, Director Vance. We are not the helpless primitives your reports described." Vance's composure finally cracked. "What do you want from us?" "Want?" Paraxis tilted her massive head. "We want you to leave. We want our world restored to what it was before you came. We want our children to grow up in clean skies and pure water." "The mining operation represents billions of credits in investment," Vance said. "The corporate board will never authorize a complete withdrawal." "Then perhaps," Torvin said, standing slowly, "we should discuss the matter with your corporate board directly." The threat was unmistakable. Marcus could see Vance calculating the implications. Dragons with interstellar flight capability, arriving unannounced at corporate headquarters. "That won't be necessary," Vance said quickly. "I'm sure we can find a compromise." "Compromise," Paraxis repeated. "You continue to poison our world, but perhaps a little less enthusiastically. We could implement environmental safeguards, rehabilitation programs, profit-sharing agreements." "Director," Marcus interrupted, "I think they're trying to tell us that some things aren't negotiable." Elder Paraxis nodded approvingly. "The human Marcus understands. This world is our home, not a resource to be exploited. There can be no compromise on this point." "But surely there's some middle ground," Vance pressed. "Some way for both our species to benefit." Keeper Zephyra stepped forward, her scales shimmering with patterns that Marcus now recognized as emotional displays. "Tell me, Director Vance, if aliens came to your homeworld and began strip mining your sacred sites, poisoning your water, and filling your skies with industrial waste, what middle ground would you seek?" Vance had no answer. "The meeting is concluded," Elder Paraxis announced. "You have seen what we wanted you to see. You have heard what we wanted you to hear. What you do with this knowledge will determine the future relationship between our peoples." As the dragons began to disperse, Draconius approached Marcus. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Marcus followed the young dragon to the edge of the amphitheater out of earshot of the others. "Your leader thinks like a merchant," Draconius observed. "Everything is a transaction to be negotiated." "Not all humans are like that," Marcus said. "I know. You are proof of this. But the question remains, what will you do now?" Marcus looked back at Vance, who was already planning how to spin this encounter for the corporate board. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm just one person." "Sometimes," Draconius said, "one person is enough to change everything." As the human team began their journey back to base camp, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was just beginning. The return journey to base camp was tense and silent. Vance set a punishing pace, clearly eager to get back to familiar territory and communications equipment. Morrison and Kowalski flanked the group with military precision, their heads constantly turning to scan for threats that might emerge from the canyon shadows. Marcus brought up the rear, his mind racing. The meeting had gone worse than he'd feared. Instead of finding common ground, the two sides had found only deeper divisions. Vance saw the dragons as obstacles to be managed or resources to be exploited. The dragons saw humans as a plague to be expelled from their world, and somehow, Marcus was caught in the middle. They reached base camp just as the triple moons were setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Vance immediately headed for the communications center, while Morrison briefed the security team on what they'd witnessed. Marcus was cleaning his equipment when his personal comm unit chimed. Private message from Director Vance. Report to my office in 1 hour. The hour passed too quickly. Marcus found himself sitting across from Vance again, but this time the director wasn't alone. A holographic projection flickered above the desk, showing the stern face of board chairman Helena Cross, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mr. Chen, Cross said without preamble, Director Vance has briefed me on your encounter with the hostile natives. I understand you've become something of an expert on their capabilities. I wouldn't say expert, ma'am. I've had limited contact with them. Limited but significant, Cross replied. According to Director Vance, they possess advanced technology and the capability to threaten our operations. That's correct. They also possess valuable resources that could be beneficial to the corporation if properly managed. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Ma'am, with respect, I don't think they're interested in being managed. Mr. Chen, Cross said, her voice growing cold. Every species is interested in survival. The question is whether they're intelligent enough to choose cooperation over extinction. The threat was unmistakable. Marcus glanced at Vance, who was studying his hands with suspicious intensity. What exactly are you asking me to do? Marcus said carefully. I'm asking you to help us resolve this situation permanently, Cross replied. You've established a relationship with these creatures. You understand their psychology, their weaknesses. Their weaknesses? Every species has them, Cross said matter-of-factly. Pressure points that can be exploited to ensure compliance. We need you to identify those pressure points. Marcus realized with growing horror what she was really asking. You want me to find ways to coerce them. I want you to find ways to make them see reason, Cross corrected. The mining operation will continue, Mr. Chen. The only question is whether it continues with their cooperation or over their corpses. The hologram flickered off, leaving Marcus alone with Vance. You look troubled, Vance observed. I should be, Marcus replied. You're asking me to betray beings who trusted me enough to save my life. I'm asking you to do your job, Vance said. Your contract makes you responsible for maintaining equipment and ensuring operational efficiency. Right now, the dragons are a threat to operational efficiency. They're not equipment to be fixed, Marcus said angrily. They're intelligent beings with legitimate grievances. They're obstacles, Vance replied. And obstacles can be removed or circumvented. The choice of methods is up to you. Marcus stood to leave, but Vance's voice stopped him. Chen, think very carefully about your next move. Your contract includes non-disclosure agreements, exclusivity clauses, and penalty provisions. If you violate any of those terms, the legal consequences will follow you for the rest of your life. Are you threatening me? I'm reminding you where your loyalties should lie. Marcus left the meeting with his mind made up. He couldn't be part of whatever the corporation was planning. But he also couldn't simply walk away, not with the dragons' lives hanging in the balance. Back in his quarters, Marcus began making preparations. He packed essential supplies, downloaded star charts and planetary data to his personal device, and composed a carefully worded message that he would send to Draconius when the time was right. But first, he needed to know what the corporation was really planning. That night, Marcus used his maintenance access codes to enter the administrative sections of the base network. 3 years of fixing corporate equipment had given him an intimate knowledge of the base's computer systems, and he used that knowledge now to access files he was never meant to see. What he found made his blood run cold. Operation Dragon Slayer, a comprehensive plan to neutralize the dragon threat using a combination of orbital bombardment, chemical weapons, and ground-based assault teams. The plan had been in development since the first surveillance footage of Marcus's rescue was transmitted to corporate headquarters. The corporation had never intended to negotiate. The meeting at Crystal Heart had been a reconnaissance mission, a chance to assess dragon capabilities and identify targets for elimination. Marcus read through the operational details with growing horror. Automated weapons platforms were already being constructed in orbit around Kepler 442b. Chemical agents specifically designed to disrupt dragon physiology were being synthesized in corporate labs. Military contractors were assembling a strike force that would arrive within 2 months. The dragons had less than 60 days to live, and they didn't even know it. Marcus copied everything to his personal device and then carefully covered his tracks. When the morning shift arrived, there would be no evidence of his intrusion. He spent the remaining hours before dawn composing a detailed warning message to send to Draconius. Everything he'd learned, every tactical advantage the corporation thought it had, every weakness in the planned assault that the dragons might be able to exploit. As the sun rose over Kepler 442b, Marcus made his final decision. He activated his emergency beacon and sent a general distress call, claiming equipment malfunction in the Deep Canyon system. While the search and rescue team was preparing to deploy, Marcus slipped out of the base through a maintenance tunnel. He made his way to a communication relay point he'd scouted earlier, far enough from base to avoid detection, but with sufficient range to reach the dragon territory. He powered up his portable transmitter and sent his warning to Draconius. The reply came within minutes. Understood. Can you reach the Crystal Heart? Marcus checked his supplies and calculated the distance. Affirmative. Will take 6 hours. Come quickly. There is much to discuss. Marcus destroyed the transmitter and began his final journey into dragon territory. Behind him, search teams were spreading out through the canyons looking for a distressed technician who was already beyond their reach. He'd made his choice. Whether it was the right choice remained to be seen. The walk to Crystal Heart gave Marcus time to think about what he'd done. He'd violated his contract, betrayed his employer, and probably destroyed any chance of working in the extraction industry again. But he'd also prevented a genocide. He hoped the dragons would see it that way. When he finally reached the amphitheater, he found it transformed. The crystal formations were pulsing with urgent energy, and dozens of dragons filled the space. They weren't just the Ember clan now. Marcus could see representatives from other clans, other territories, all gathering in response to his warning. Elder Piraxis approached him with something that might have been gratitude in her ancient eyes. "Human Marcus," she said formally, "you have chosen to stand with us against your own kind. This is not a decision we take lightly." "I couldn't let them slaughter you," Marcus replied. "Not after everything I've seen, everything I've learned." "And what have you learned?" Marcus looked around at the assembled dragons, at beings who had built a civilization based on harmony with their world, rather than dominance over it. That there are different ways to live. Better ways. Draconius stepped forward. "My friend, you understand that this choice makes you an exile from your people?" "I understand." "And you understand that the coming conflict will test us all?" Marcus nodded. "I understand. But I also understand something else." "And what is that?" Marcus smiled grimly. "I understand that your people have been preparing for this fight a lot longer than the corporation realizes. And I understand that humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons or our technology." "Then what is it?" Elder Piraxis asked. "Our ability to choose what's right over what's profitable," Marcus replied, "even when it costs us everything." The dragons exchanged glances, and Marcus heard the rapid subsonic communication that passed between them like lightning. Finally, Piraxis spoke. "Very well, Marcus Chen. If you would stand with the dragons against the storm that comes, then you will fight as a dragon. But first there is something you must see." She gestured toward the deepest part of the crystal formation, where light pulsed like a massive heartbeat. "Something your corporate masters could never have imagined in their worst nightmares." Elder Piraxis led Marcus deeper into the crystal formation than any human had ever gone. The walls pulsed with increasing intensity as they descended, and Marcus felt a strange resonance in his bones, as if the crystals were singing to him on frequencies just below his ability to hear. "What you are about to see," Piraxis said as they walked, "has been hidden from your kind since the first mining ships arrived. We debated whether to reveal it, but your sacrifice has earned you the right to know the truth." They emerged into a vast cavern that took Marcus's breath away. The space was easily a kilometer across, its ceiling lost in glowing mist. But it wasn't the size that stunned him. It was what filled the cavern. Hundreds of massive crystal formations rose from the floor like frozen pillars of light, each one pulsing with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. And within each crystal, Marcus could see shapes, vast sleeping forms that were unmistakably draconic but larger than anything he'd seen above ground. "The ancients," Draconius explained quietly, "the first generation of our people, the ones who shaped this world and then chose to merge with it when their time ended. Marcus stared in awe. They're still alive? In a sense, Peraxis replied. Their consciousness has become part of the planetary crystal network. Their memories, their knowledge, their wisdom, all preserved forever in living stone. And they're aware of what's happening? More than aware, Torvin said, emerging from the shadows. They're the ones who've been coordinating our response to your corporate invasion. As if summoned by his words, the crystals began to pulse brighter. The sleeping forms within shifted slightly, and Marcus heard something that made his hair stand on end. Voices, dozens of them speaking in harmonious chorus. Welcome, Marcus Chen, the voices said, speaking directly into his mind. We have watched your choices with interest. Marcus stumbled backward, but Draconia steadied him with a gentle claw. It's all right. They won't harm you. You chose truth over profit, the ancient voices continued. Compassion over compliance. These are rare qualities in your species. Not that rare, Marcus managed to say. Rare enough, the voices replied with what might have been amusement, but perhaps not as rare as we once believed. Tell us, Marcus Chen, do you know why your people chose this world for their mining operation? Marcus thought about the corporate surveys, the mineral assessments, the titanium deposits, the rare earth elements, surface treasures, the voices said dismissively. Useful, but hardly unique. No, they came here because their instruments detected something else, something that drove their scientists to near madness with possibility. The cavern filled with new light, and Marcus saw that the crystal formations were connected by flowing streams of energy that pulsed through the rock itself. A planetary consciousness network, the ancient voices explained. Living data storage on a scale your technology cannot match. The ability to preserve not just information but actual experience, memory, wisdom accumulated over millions of years. Marcus understood with growing horror. They want to harvest the crystals, turn them into some kind of biological computer system. Now you see the true scope of their ambition, Peraxis said grimly. They would kill our ancestors, strip their consciousness from the crystals and use their sacred essence to build machines. But the crystals are connected to everything, aren't they? Marcus said, pieces falling into place. The whole ecosystem, the atmosphere, the geological stability of the planet. The crystals are the planet, the ancient voices confirmed. Remove them and this world dies. Every living thing, from the smallest microbe to the mightiest dragon, would perish within days. The corporation knows this? Of course they know, Torvin snarled. Their survey reports documented the ecological connections. They simply don't care. Marcus felt sick. The scale of the intended atrocity was beyond anything he'd imagined. How many people know the truth? Among your people? Very few, the ancient voices said. Most of the miners, technicians, and support staff believe they're simply extracting minerals. Only the senior corporate leadership understands what they're really after. And they're willing to commit genocide for it. They are willing to commit omnicide, the voices corrected. The death of an entire world. Marcus looked around at the sleeping ancients, at the vast network of consciousness that had guided this world for countless eons. What can we do? The military force they're sending will be massive. We have been preparing, Elder Peraxis said, but our preparations require something we have never asked of any human. What? Your help in preventing this atrocity, not just as an individual, but as a representative of the better angels of your nature. The cavern filled with new images projected by the crystals, scenes of human history that Marcus had never seen before. Moments of courage and sacrifice, of humans choosing to do what was right despite the cost. Soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Scientists refusing to develop weapons of mass destruction. Citizens standing up to tyranny even when it meant their own death. Your species is not inherently evil, the ancient voices said, but it is inherently conflicted. You have the capacity for both great compassion and great cruelty, often within the same individual. The question, Peraxis added, is which aspect of humanity will ultimately prevail. Marcus thought about his co-workers back at the mining base. Good people, most of them, who had no idea what they were really part of. What are you asking me to do? Help us contact the other humans who would choose compassion over profit if they knew the truth, the ancient voices said. Your corporate masters control information, but they cannot control individual conscience once it is awakened. You want me to expose the truth to the mining crew. We want you to give them the same choice you were given. Draconius clarified. The choice to stand with life against death. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll need a way to communicate with them without the corporation detecting it. That can be arranged, the ancient voices said. The crystal network extends far beyond this cavern. We can provide you with a communication method that your corporate technology cannot intercept. Paraxis stepped forward. But know this, Marcus Chen. Once you begin this path, there will be no turning back. The corporation will mark you as a traitor, and they will stop at nothing to silence you. They were going to silence me anyway, Marcus replied, along with everyone else on this planet. Then you accept our proposal? Marcus looked around at the vast chamber, at the sleeping ancients who had preserved wisdom and life for millions of years, at the dragons who were fighting to protect their world from destruction. I accept, he said, but I want something in return. The dragons exchanged surprised glances. What do you want? Paraxis asked. I want to know that if we succeed, if we stop this corporate atrocity, humanity will be welcome to learn from your people, not to exploit, not to profit, but to grow, to become better than we are. The ancient voices were quiet for a long moment. Then they spoke with something that sounded like hope. Marcus Chen, you have just asked for the one thing we have always wanted to give, the chance to share wisdom rather than guard it jealously, the opportunity to teach rather than merely survive. Then we have a deal. The crystals around them pulsed with new energy, and Marcus felt something change within himself, not physically but spiritually. He was no longer just a human technician caught between two species. He was a bridge between worlds, a translator not just of languages but of understanding itself. The next 72 hours would determine whether that bridge could bear the weight of preventing a war. 3 days later, when the corporate strike force arrived in orbit around Kepler 442b, they found something they had never expected. The mining base had been abandoned, its human crew evacuated to safe zones under dragon protection. In their place was a message broadcast on all frequencies, carrying the testimony of Marcus Chen and 67 other humans who had chosen to stand with the dragons against corporate genocide. The message was, accompanied by complete documentation of Operation Dragonslayer, leaked to news networks across human space. Within hours, protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Corporate stock prices plummeted. Board members faced criminal charges for crimes against sapient life. The strike force withdrew without firing a shot, and in the Crystal Heart, Marcus Chen stood with his dragon friends and watched as the first human students arrived to learn from the ancient wisdom, beginning a new chapter in the relationship between two species who had chosen understanding over warfare. The rescued dragon had become the rescuer, and both species had been saved by the simple human concept that some things are more important than profit. Sometimes, doing the right thing really was enough to change everything.